Good morning, guys, and welcome to my unboxing and review of the Real Grade G3 Gundam. As you can see, this is a premium Bandai exclusive, and I got it for $29, which is more than reasonable for an early Real Grade, because, as you might be able to tell, this is a recolor of the original Real Grade RX-78-2, the first Real Grade ever, which came out in 2010. This recolor is from 2015, but as far as I can tell, it's going to be pretty much identical to that kit, except for the color scheme. So it's rather fitting that after I take a look at the first high grade of the new G-Quacks line, that the first Real Grade to take a look at was, in fact, pretty much the first Real Grade that ever came out back in 2010. I know people talk a lot about early Real Grade syndrome. I haven't really experienced it, except for the strike frame, which, as far as I can tell, is the most infamous one. So I'm eager if this kit conforms to the stereotype of early Real Grade syndrome, or if it's just a myth and it's mostly relegated to things like the strike frame, the Zeta, the Sinanju. So, as you can see, this kit is just going to be a recolor of the original RX-78-2, except in those G3 colors, that kind of grayscale that the Gundam was originally supposed to be in before it got toyified into the iconic tricolor we know and love today. As you can see by my spinning around of the box, being a premium Bandai box, being pretty typical, there's not really much to look at, so let's get right into it. Inside the box, taking a look at the manual first, we get the original RX-78-2 manual, as you can see, number 1 in the Real Grade line, with this very typical kind of zoomed in kind of render of the Real Grade model. Yeah. And as you can see, being the first in the Real Grade line, we have a full kind of Runner B Advanced MS joint, and I think the part that I'm going to be the most frustrated with, you have those old RG articulated tiny hands that are really annoying to work with. Yeah. A lot of this build is going to be pretty typical for early Real Grades, where you kind of assemble the frame first and then build on top of it. Again, they really wanted to show off the Advanced MS joint. In the middle, we get a full-page spread showing off the full completed build. Of course, this is not in the G3 colors, this is just the standard Gundam. This is just the standard RX-78-2 color scheme, showing off some of the decals up top. Yeah, and after that we have a very comprehensive decal guide, because, again, this set the stage for a lot of the trends we saw in the Real Grade line, including a very comprehensive list of realistic decals. Of course, besides the original RX-78-2 manual, we have this insert for the G3 Gundam. It looks like we will be receiving a couple of new runners for some altered parts from this kit. It looks like it's mostly just going to be accents for things like the joints and the Federation cross on the shield. Of course, we have a new color guide, actually in color, which is nice, for the G3 color scheme, a guide for the specific G3 decals, and of course, showing off where the new parts are going to be used. It looks like, yeah, those are caps for the ankles, and caps for the knees and elbows. And of course, it looks like also a new scope for the beam rifle, and the new Federation cross for the shield. So besides the manual, inside the box we get 5 bags of runners, and in those bags, 12 runners, as well as this gargantuan sticker sheet. It's been a while since I built a Real Grade, but I don't remember them being this huge. Including a bunch of nice metallic decals here, of course stickers for the eyes, and then a bunch of the realistic style decals that are unique to the Real Grade line. And of course, in addition to those decals, we actually get a very small sheet of some water slide decals for the EFSF logos in the G3 font, and of course indicating that this is the G3 Gundam, which is very nice. So we'll see how those look on the kit later. As for the runners themselves, so starting with Runner A in 4 colors, of course, we have this kind of light gray, kind of almost off-white, but still gray color for some of the parts for the legs here, for some outer frame parts, and some kind of accent panel parts. Of course, we have this part in darker gray for kind of those sub-generator hatches in the skirts. You have parts for the collar. You have this Federation cross here, which of course we're not using because the one we are taking a look at is going to be in yellow for the new runner on the kit. We have some clear parts for the canopy for the core fighter, and the kind of eyes, and our beam saber effects, which are on the A runner in this clear pink. Oh, and also notable is these beam effects do seem quite long. I'm gonna take a look at some standard size beam effects later and confirm that they are in fact longer than usual. Of course, being a color swap of the first Real Grade, we have Runner B, the Advanced MS joint here, for a full inner frame. These runners have kind of become infamous because of their kind of tendency to go floppy, especially the early ones. Again, I can't really confirm it apart from the strike frame, because I have the Gundam Mark II frame, and that's famously like very solid, and that's the only other kind of early real grade frame I've worked with. So we'll see if this one is also floppy out of the box like the Strikes was. Oh, before I forget, these runners were printed in December of 2024. On runner C, another multicolor runner, this time in 3 colors. We have that same dark gray that we saw on the A runner. So we have the same dark gray that we saw on the A runner for a bunch of accent parts. We have parts for the feet, parts for the shield. We also have that kind of light gray, almost off-white color for some armor parts. And then we have, in very typical real grade fashion, this kind of two-tone effect with this gray being noticeably lighter than this one for some accent parts. Runners D1 and D2 and this off-white. For a bunch of different armor parts. We also have the inner parts for the shield. We have our standing Amuro pilot figure, and parts for the V-fin, and some miscellaneous armor parts. Runners E1 and E2, and a similar very light gray off-white to runner A, for parts for the armor for the legs and skirts, as well as additional parts for the weapons. You see parts for the Hyper Bazooka here, and the kind of inner part for the beam rifle, which is kind of odd. I never really recalled seeing this part in this color, which is very interesting. And we also have a part for the head here. A small runner F and a very dark gray for some more frame parts. This large runner G, and also in dark gray for some more frame parts. You also have parts for the Hyper Bazooka here, parts for the backpack, and some landing gear parts for the core fighter. Runner H and a black ABS for some more inner frame parts, as well as parts for thruster details. Alright, getting into the 2 new runners in this kit, starting with runner I for a bunch of the cap parts for the ankles, knees, and elbows, as well as this additional pilot figure. I'm not quite sure where that's going to be used or what that's for. I don't think it's a standing figure because it doesn't have that little base that all the real gray standing figures have, and it didn't show up in the new kind of instruction insert, so I'm going to see what that's for. And of course, runner J3 for some yellow accent parts. This is just kind of for the parts on the other runners that were replaced by that kind of dark gray, that for parts that were supposed to remain yellow, like the Federation Cross. So with all that out of the way, I will see you after the build. Alright, welcome back. Here's the real grade G3 Gundam. I snap built it, panel lined it lightly, and applied the water slide decals. I applied very minimal of the standard sticker style decals in this kit because kind of in the painted builds and in the kind of decal guide for the insert for the G3 Gundam, it did kind of show off that this is supposed to be a kind of more minimalist kind of take and color scheme on the Gundam, so I didn't want to overload it with the real grade decals like you would see in most kits. You'll also notice that on the back, the kind of 2 flaps for both the action base adapter and the Hyper Bazooka are open. That is because they are very hard to open once they are closed, so I'm just leaving them open just kind of permanently. But yeah, getting into the build of this kit, just quick disclosure, I messed up on 2 parts of this kit. One is minor, doesn't really affect anything. One is major and will affect things. So the minor part, I'll throw it up on screen right now. The kind of torso and waist for the runner B advanced MS joint were kind of fused together into 3 parts. You have the torso, you have the waist, and you have a connector piece. You're supposed to separate all 3 of them. When I was separating the middle connector from the torso, one of the pegs snapped off inside the torso, which isn't really a problem if I'm just going to leave it joined like this permanently, which I am. The only thing it affects is I'm not really able to swap out the core block in the system for the core fighter, which we'll talk about in accessories, but apart from that, no real issue. The other thing is, it's been a while since I built a real grade kit. I forgot you're supposed to work the advanced MS joint before you assemble, just to kind of loosen it up because they can be stiff out of the box. The right leg of this kit, I did not work it before I assembled it, and when I went to bend the leg, the thigh snapped in half. I plastic cemented it back together, and I can articulate the right leg. I just need to be very careful or it falls apart. So getting to the build of this kit, this is essentially just the build is the first real grade kit ever made, the original real grade RX-78-2 from 2010, and it shows. This build is, I wouldn't say cumbersome, but it's very annoying. There are a lot of very small parts like you would expect in a real grade, but a lot of it is just for the two-tone kind of panel details, so it doesn't really feel super necessary, and I'll show in a comparison with the real grade RX-78-2 2.0 later. Yeah, the build for this kit was fairly annoying. Kind of building around that advanced MS joint is a little weird. There were a lot of parts that were very loose on the kit. I've seen people online talking about how, especially on the arms here, a lot of those tiny parts they have to glue in place because they kept popping off. I didn't have that issue, but I can certainly see it being an issue. These kind of shoulder panels kept wanting to fall off of the frame it's on. And these shoulder caps fall off very easily. The elbow caps fall off very easily. Same thing with the shoulder caps on the sides. This kit I wouldn't call it a hand grenade. Like, I wouldn't go that far. But there are definitely many loose parts in this kit that you need to pay attention to. Again, your mileage may vary. I didn't encounter super many problems apart from the advanced MS joint stuff, which was just me forgetting exactly how to work with them properly. But yeah, the build is a little annoying and very dated as you would expect, but it's not a deal breaker, especially for the $29 I got this kit for. Getting to aesthetics, again, this kit is essentially the first real grade. Its whole thing is kind of being more realistic than the more anime accurate or very stylized models of either typical kits or the Verka line, respectively. And it kind of shows with the many kind of panel details on this kit, the very detailed inner frame. There are lots of metallic details you'll see as this rotates around. There's some copper metallic details on the sides of the knees. You'll see it on the front of the elbows. You'll see it in the chest vents. All of it, along with the kind of multitude of surface detail on this kit, works to enhance that kind of realistic look, although not as well as the 2.0. Again, we'll talk about that later. But this kit's very interesting. It's definitely kind of sculpt-wise, it's quite nice. I did say I panel-lined this kit. It's kind of hard to see. I'll hold it up closer to the camera here. I don't know if you can see that, but there are quite a few surface details all over this kit, like on the sides of the shins there. It's all very shallow. If you're using pore type panel liner, it won't show up. It won't stick in the details at all. You're going to want to use a scribing tool to get the most out of the surface details on this kit. And in my opinion, these kind of foil stickers with the metallic details can look a little cheap on this kit, especially with how much you have to work them into place to get them in right. If you get them in first try, not a problem. I didn't, clearly. The kind of metallic parts look, I guess, a little cheap because they get that kind of foil aspect if you don't get them perfect the first time. But yeah, a lot of these details are a little strange. A lot of the detail, like, because you can't really make out that surface detail because, again, it's very shallow, all of the detail comes from the two-tone, like, many, especially in this color scheme, the various, like, shades of gray. Which is certainly interesting, although I'm not the biggest fan of it. But yeah, it's the ARC-78-2 in a quite nice color scheme again. This is the color scheme that was intended for the ARC-78-2 before it got toyified into the tricolor we know. I'm not the biggest fan of the G3 color scheme. I think the real type colors are the best, but that's personal taste. Yeah, aesthetically, this kit's quite nice. It's pretty much entirely color accurate, as you would expect out of the real grade line, except for the eyes, which are just a plain clear piece. You just slap the sticker on. There are no stickers for the head cameras. It's just a plain kind of faded purplish blue. So moving on to a size comparison. For a size comparison, here it is next to a standard size high grade, being the high grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. As you can see, being the Gundam, it's going to be pretty standard height. The real grade proportions are a little different from like the proportions it's supposed to be in the scale model, so it's going to be a hair taller than the average high grade. But yeah, it's essentially the standard high grade size. And of course, here's a visual comparison between the real grade G3 Gundam and the real grade Gundam 2.0. So of course, barring the many decals I put on the 2.0 version, you can see how much they've kind of advanced the aesthetic of the real grade line between number 1 and number 40 in the line. And of course, number 40 is going to be better. Bold take, I know. 14 years and 39 standard releases of kits later is better than the first one they released in the line. But yeah, this is just kind of showing off the differences in how they express that kind of realistic detail between the two. The original is just kind of in that two-tone color and the many different colored panels all over the kit, whereas the 2 goes for more kind of glimpses into that inner frame, because you see those gray parts where the inner frame kind of pokes out a little bit from the armor and gives that look that, like, okay, yeah, this is how it's assembled. The armor's bolted on in these spots onto the frame. It's a much more interesting way of expressing detail, in my opinion. And I certainly like it a lot more than the original model, which kind of by comparison looks downright simplistic, even though, again, for the time, this would have been a very kind of cool, unique, detailed model. You'll also notice that the proportions are slightly different, especially in the torso. I don't know if it's the colors or the surface detail or something, but on the torso on the real grade 2.0 protrudes significantly more, and it's also slimmer in the midsection. So for accessories, here's the real grade G3 Gundam and everything it comes with. So starting as usual with the hand options, we have kind of closed fists that come pre-molded on the advanced MS joint, although I suspect you are probably not going to pose it with those. Instead, you're going to be using these infamous real-grade articulated hands. Of course, you get one for each side. I'm just going to hold one for demonstration's sake. So yeah, these hands are fully articulated. Of course, only one point of articulation at the base. The fingers are on ball joints for the thumb, index, and then the other 3 are all connected. These hands are kind of difficult to get to hold on to things and make them look natural, which is why I'm not the biggest fan, only because you could either have it with no points of articulation besides just the base, so it's stuck in this kind of permanently curved, slightly awkward position, or you can give it articulation and then you run into the problem of the fingers tend to fall apart. So yeah, there's kind of no winning if you have articulated hands in this scale. But yeah, so we'll see how well these hands can hold on to the weapons in the posing section. You have the beam rifle here, and this interesting kind of two-color variant of the beam rifle with this very, like, light gray section for the internals with the typical dark gray shell for the beam rifle that you would all know and expect. The camera for the beam rifle is, of course, in yellow. There is articulation in both the secondary handle and the camera. You do get a core fighter with the G3 Gundam. Of course, it is in those G3 colors. It does look quite nice, and it can transform into the kind of block form that controls the Gundam and dock it inside. I'm not doing that. The one thing that the original real grade Gundam has over the 2.0, in my opinion, is that this comes with a kind of core block that you insert in, so you can separate the core, so you can display the core fighter separately. This is kind of unremarkable outside of that. It is just the core fighter after all. The only thing I will comment on is that this core fighter is very kind of floppy and loose. It's just constantly wanting to transform it. Every time I'm handling it, the cockpit either slides in or starts folding down. Same thing with the fins and the wings. It's just a little annoying to handle, but once if you set it down and leave it there, it will not move. That's fine. Of course, you have beam sabers. You get 4 in this kit, even though the Gundam's only supposed to have 2. You, of course, have the 2 in the backpack back there, and you have these 2 extra ones with tabs in them for easier gripping in the hands. They can also clip onto the kind of under the inside of the shield with these tabs. You of course have these 2 beam effects, which I wasn't quite sure because I didn't really have a point of comparison on the kit. I thought they looked a little long. They are long. These are essentially identical to the SB1 1/100 scale beam effects that you would see with master grade kits. So these are exceptionally large for 1/144th scale, and this will definitely make the Gundam look very kind of distinct with its beam sabers if you pose on the shelf with them. And as you can see, these beam effects are pretty much as tall as the Gundam itself. You get 2 pilot figures. The standing pilot figure of Amuro Ray would have been included with the standard release of the real grade RX-78-2 Gundam, and the other figure is this little guy. Who doesn't have a base, so he can't stand, and he has this kind of what I thought was like a wingsuit thing, but it's just because he's so tiny it's kind of hard to make up the detail. This is supposed to be kind of like an ejected, like floating in space pilot figure with a little like kind of maneuver jetpack thing on his back. So if you want to have a little diorama, you could just kind of pose this guy floating there. As you can see, he has a very small, like 1mm hole on his back, so you can like thread a wire over to him or something. Of course, you get an action base adapter. This will just plug in where the Hyper Bazooka mounts on the back skirt, which unfortunately means you have nowhere to store the Hyper Bazooka if this thing is flying in the air, because unlike the Real Grade 2.0, the backpack does not have a secondary hole for placing an action base peg. You of course get the standard Gundam shield in G3 colors with that G3 water slide decal on it. There's not really much to comment on here. This is just the Gundam shield within those G3 colors. As you can see, when I top coated it, the panel liner ran a little bit. My bad. On the inside here, you of course have 2 spots to mount the beam sabers, and you also have a spot to mount the beam rifle. And it wouldn't be a Gundam release without the Hyper Bazooka. Yeah, there's not much to say here. This is just the Hyper Bazooka. You do have some color separation for the ammo inside the magazine. I don't know how well you can see the ammo's in white. The handle, of course, can rotate a little bit for easier posing of the Hyper Bazooka. Apart from that, it's pretty static. There's essentially a little like pad here, so it can comfortably rest on the shoulder. And apart from that, there's not really much articulation. It can mount on the back skirt with this peg here. So yeah, a full accessory spread for the G3 Gundam. Pretty much everything you would expect the standard Gundam to have. So for articulation, starting with the head, it will look up pretty far. It will look down a decent amount. Of course, you get a little bit of side to side tilt and full 360 rotation. The shoulders then so that thing I said earlier about this kit not being super hand grenade-y, I might have been a little off. I tried to swing the shoulder forward and the back panel fell off. The arm popped out of the ball popped out of the socket inside the shoulder. There is a tiny bit of swing there, not much at all, unfortunately. The shoulder armor can rotate a little bit independently of the arm, but is going to pop out a little when you do so. Of course, rotation in the upper bicep for side raises. Yeah, you can't get the last shooting pose, unfortunately. This is somewhere the Real Grade 2.0 really shines with its much better articulation, not being limited by the advanced MS joint. This is fine, although this is the kind of the one kit you would want to be able to replicate the last shooting pose. Just kind of arm fully extended upwards. But yeah, you do get a decent, like, 135 degree bend. Of course, a full double bend in the elbow before it collides with the shoulder armor. For the torso, then. Oh. Yeah, so the thrusters on my backpack are also quite loose. They keep falling off whenever I handle the torso. So the torso, then, will crunch forward a small amount. Backwards, not much at all. Oh, there goes the side skirt. Yep. Okay, this kit does fall apart quite a bit when you handle it, so just be careful. Side to side, a surprising amount considering the ab crunch. And of course, you get some swivel. You can't rotate it 360 degrees. The cockpit hatch can open, and you see the kind of dummy core block inside. On the backpack, these thrusters are on ball joints, but as I mentioned earlier, they fall off very easily, so I wouldn't try and articulate them all that much. And the beam sabers can swivel and rotate in the handle in case you want the Gundam to be reaching back to try and grab the beam saber or something. The skirts, the front skirts are on ball joints. They do pop out very easily. Side skirts can move up a tiny bit, but not super far. And back skirts are also on ball joints. Oh, yep, there they go. Okay, so for the legs then, I'm going to be not going to be using its right leg because, again, I snapped the thigh, and this front skirt really doesn't want to stay in. The front leg can kick out forward 90 degrees before the skirt will pop off. It will kick out to the side, also 90 degrees, and it will kick backwards 90 degrees. So flat 90 degree bends across the board, not bad. When you bend the knee, there is an armor sliding gimmick, as you can see in the thigh and the kneecap. You do get a full double bend in the knee, which is very nice, and it looks great with that armor slide. And of course you will get some rotation in the upper thigh. For the feet then, the ankle armor will pivot up and down a small amount. The foot will tilt in and out, not particularly far. The entire foot can kind of swing forward a decent amount, and downward also a decent amount. There is foot separation in the toe for better articulation. There's also some heel separation, although you won't be getting much articulation out of that. So yeah, overall, decent articulation, if not exceptional, but again, this is the first real grade. It is going to be a pretty decent poser. Speaking of which, let's get into some poses. So getting the G3 Gundam into a bit of a spin, and starting with the usual running and gunning ground pose. This pose is noticeably less dynamic than it normally is. That right leg, like me snapping the thigh, really doesn't help that. But even outside of that, the parts that I did assemble properly, they are noticeably loose. This kit had a really hard time balancing on one foot, especially on my glass spinning base. Things kept wanting to slide, it kept wanting to tip over. Getting the hand to grip onto the gun was very annoying. As you can see, the fingers look all off. Getting that peg into the hole in the hand was also a bit of a challenge. But in general, this kit does look, it's a looker for sure. It's not a poser. It's certainly very annoying to get it into poses. It was kind of hand grenadey. The flap on the back of the left shoulder kept falling off. The skirts kept falling off. The back thrusters kept falling off. It was just kind of annoying to get into a pose, but it looks fine in this pose. Once you get it there, it will stay. This is a pose that I wouldn't mind putting on the shelf. It's definitely not the greatest. And of course, here it is kneeling with the massive beam saber effect in my attempt to recreate that kind of classic kneeling post beam saber slash pose. Those large beam effects look great on this kit. The kind of detail on the beam saber, though you can't really see it when it's holding it, is quite nice. There's, of course, a molded little switch when it flicks on. The beam saber can come out. It's not articulated at all. It's just detail on the beam saber hilt. But of course, it's always nice to have. These beam sabers are quite nice. This is definitely a kind of rare instance where I would consider posing the Gundam with the beam saber, just because these effects are so nice and make it look so dynamic in any pose. It's fantastic. And it can kneel quite easily. The connection to the hips is a little weak. The legs did want to pop out a few times while I was doing this. You might notice the front left skirt is just gone. It would not stay on with the leg like that. So yeah, that is a limitation of it. The skirts do want to pop off very easily, but it does look quite good kneeling, and this is definitely a pose I would consider keeping it on the shelf. And of course, the Gundam is not permanently land-borne. Here it is up on the action base in a kind of downward aggressive firing pose. Again, the right leg snapping the thigh means I can't have the right leg be as dynamic as I would normally have it be, but this gives a kind of good example of what it would look like in the air. It does look quite nice. Again, the kind of thin proportions of the Gundam, not in a skeletal way and not in a kind of fleshy way like you saw with the G-Quacks, but that classic kind of Gundam thinness where it's kind of replicating that kind of like human, like I guess leg muscle with that curved armor in the lower leg. All of that helps kind of exaggerate all of these very athletic movements in the air. It helps it look great in these kind of downward firing poses, and all of these kind of in motion poses. Like these early UC kits tend to be very blocky, and you definitely see it in this kit in the torso and the upper body, but those kind of very dynamic, I guess organically shaped legs definitely help the motion look a lot better in this kit while it's in the air. And of course, you can't forget the Hyper Bazooka. I tried to pose it earlier in those other poses with the Hyper Bazooka mounted on the back skirt. That was not working. It kept getting knocked off by any movement the legs were doing. So yeah, I just omitted that, and here it is, kind of on the ground in a wide-legged upward firing pose. The Hyper Bazooka, it speaks for itself. It's a very large, impressive weapon, definitely helps the Gundam have more presence on the shelf. It's not as iconic as something like the beam rifle is, of course, but it certainly looks great. And with the kind of like number of Gundams throughout the years that like you would normally pose with the beam rifle, I'm definitely posing this one with the bazooka. It looks great. The handle being able to move is definitely a point in its favor. I still remember that Hyper Bazooka from the Master Grade Easy 8, that not having a moving handle really helps me appreciate all of these later bazookas that can move the handle to help it pose. These kind of wide-legged ground poses this kit can achieve very easily, and it looks great in them. This is definitely a pose I would consider having this kit in on the shelf. So in conclusion, the Real Grade G3 Gundam, a recolor of the original ARC-78-2. This is definitely a kit I would not recommend if you don't have patience. The amount of kind of jank you have to deal with the hand grenade parts of this kit, and the kind of looseness of that original Advanced MS joint is really, I guess, jarring to deal with if you're used to only modern kits. But for $29, this kit is definitely a cool addition to a collection for like time capsule purposes if you don't already have the Real Grade RX-78-2 1.0, just to see what like the Real Grade line was like back then. Although, if you were to get only one old kit, I would not recommend this one. If you just want to see what those old MS joints could be, I of course would recommend the Real Grade Gundam Mark II. That kit is fantastic, even with a full Advanced MS joint. That kit is very solid. They definitely got it right with that one. And if you want a Real Grade ARC-78-2, of course, the 2.0 is right there for an additional $8, at least on P Bandai. You could get that kit for $37 there stateside. And for that extra $8, you get 14 years and 39 standard releases worth of experience and technology and advancements in the Real Grade line that make it just leaps and bounds better than this kit. This kit, I don't know if you could tell, but I was very off in earlier sections of this video because I was very frustrated trying to pose this kit with the sheer amount of things that just kept falling off and just wouldn't pose right. Of course, some of that is my fault by snapping the leg, but a lot of it wasn't. Even properly assembled, this kit is noticeably loose and parts do tend to fall off. The skirts are really bad. The shoulder panels are very hit and miss. One of them kept falling off, the other three were fine, and the thrusters on the backpack kept falling off no matter what. But yeah, despite the jank, this kit is definitely a looker, and if you have kind of the patience to deal with it, or if you're just going to pose it on the shelf just kind of standing there and looking cool and showing off that G3 color scheme, then yeah, I would definitely recommend this kit in those cases. So, that was my review of the Real Grade G3 Gundam. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, please consider subscribing to this channel. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you next time with my review of the entry grade New Gundam FF.